Good evening, everyone, and the next in a series of UKIP, the original Brexiteers. I'd like to introduce my next former UKIP MEP and UKIP economic spokesman, I believe he is, Bill Etheridge.
Evening.
Hello, Bill. How are you? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm tickety-boo. How are you?
Well, thank you for joining. I know it was very last minute. You've literally just walked in the door and everything. So, thank you for joining. So, Bill, obviously, you're a regular. We've worked together for quite a long time on this fairly new project. So, one of the things I want to, or I felt that's being missed in the mainstream media is UKIP's part in history in the last 10 years. We're outside of the European Union. Yes, the deal could be vastly better. I don't think there's many Brexiteers that wouldn't agree with that, but at least we are out. So that's something. Much to the annoyance of the British establishment, which unfortunately is most of the Conservative Party. But I wanted to speak to you about your time in politics. What got you into politics in the first place? I understand you originally joined the Conservative Party. And then went on to UKIP. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I had been in the steel industry for 20 years. And then during Gordon Brown's recession, for the first time in my life, I lost my job and couldn't walk straight into another one. Because the steel trade was fairly incestuous. Everyone knows each other. And if you want to move job, you just pick up the phone. So, all right, mate, yeah, come along. And it didn't happen. So for a period of time, I was unemployed and I couldn't stand it. Couldn't bear to watch daytime TV.
What year was this? What year was this?
This was 2009.
Right. Okay. So when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. Okay.
Yeah. And I couldn't bear not doing anything. Maybe something wrong with me. I don't know. Started thinking, well, what can I do to hit back at these vile Labour people who I'd always hated the Labour Party anyway. And I blamed them for the recession where I was out of work. So I thought I'll volunteer for the local Tories. And I started doing leaflets and things like that for them. The standard legwork that we've all done, those of us in politics. And they saw something in me, and they took me on as a campaign executive, which meant they trained me up, taught me how to run campaigns. And then during the 2010 election, I was involved in running the campaigns in Dudley North and Dudley South for the Conservative candidates there. So that was how I got into politics.
Oh, right. Okay. So why the Conservative Party? What? Because obviously they've always been vastly different from the Labour Party historically. Today's a different story, in my opinion. But why the Conservative Party?
Well, I think perhaps like a lot of people, I was so busy getting on with day-to-day life for a lot of years that I'd lost track of really what the Conservatives were. And in my mind, there was still the party of Thatcher and Tebbit, actual Conservatives. That's what I thought I was joining, and it was hopelessly naive and stupid on me looking back. But that's what I thought, and it was only once I got involved that I realised that it was nothing of the sort. They had more in common with Blair than Thatcher.
Well, I think that's right. Now we look back at David Cameron, obviously the Prime Minister in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. I mean, he's as far removed from being a Conservative as you could probably get. But hey, he was Prime Minister for 5 years, and at least he gave us the referendum. So I do thank him. I do thank him for that. Obviously, he regrets it, but yeah, I thank him for that. So am I right? If you could tell the viewers, you were lucky enough to meet the great lady once.
Yes. It was at an event organised by the Bruges Group, and it was down in London. There was an event held in it was called a flat, but it was more like a penthouse, really. Went down there, and Lady Thatcher was the guest of honour. And for quite some time, we were there mixing with the other people there, who I didn't really know who all of them were. But we were having a few glasses of wine, and I was doing my normal thing of making sure I got as much of the wine in as I could. I was a couple of people there who I sort of vaguely recognised. Lord Pearson was there, Norman Lamont was there, and one or two other notables. Anyway, after a period of time, Lady Thatcher was announced that she was about to arrive. And it was an extraordinary moment because this room with about 100 people wedged in cheek by jowl, suddenly all of the air left the room because at once everyone went and a deep intake of breath as this historic, legendary figure entered the room. Well, a tiny, tiny little old lady at that point entered the room, and she was the magnetism, the charisma was still there. And I was fortunate enough to be able to actually go up to her and shake her hand. And she asked me who I was, and I told her I just nobody particular, but I'd come from the Black Country, and I wanted to thank her for what she'd done for working class people, and told her about my grandparents who bought their council houses and so on. And she looked at me straight in the eyes and said, "That really makes it all worthwhile. Thank you so much." And I really, really, I'm so happy to hear someone say something like that to me. And then for a little while, we walked around this room holding hands, which was a bizarre experience, but I quite enjoyed it. And then she, for the final part of it, she went to do a speech, and she was greeted by Stuart Wheeler, well-known donator to the UKIP party and to the Tories at the time, who did a large speech saying how great she was and all the rest of it, and finished it by saying, "If only you were 20 years younger." And to which she said, "If I were 20 years younger, I wouldn't be here with you lot, would I?" Which brought the house down. But yeah, it was a fantastic experience, one I'll never ever forget as long as I live.
I know. All of my family were big, Thatcherite fans. Well, so that brings us on to UKIP then. Why did you jump ship from the Tories to UKIP?
Well, there'd been a build-up to. I'd been one of a group of people within the Conservative Party, a very low-level part of it, but working alongside Lord Tebbit, trying to shift the Conservatives more to a Conservative position. And we'd hit the buffers and failed dramatically. And one by one, we were being purged. Well, I'd been involved in the campaign against political correctness, which was actually run by Conservative Party members and had Conservative MPs in it. And they did a campaign where they were talking about how things have changed through political correctness. And part of it was talking about gollywog dolls. And they got people of every different ethnicity, to just have a photograph holding this doll. And they put on a collage that they put out and then said, let's talk about this. Well, my enemies in the West Midlands Conservative Party, who had me down as being a bit of a wild-eyed, fanatical Thatcherite lunatic, probably right, they took this as an opportunity to class me as being a racist ratbag, and they got me reported to head office. And rather than the head office actually asking me anything about it, they suspended me and my ex-wife immediately. And basically, we were guilty until proved innocent. Well, unbeknownst to them, I'd been speaking with the local UKIP branch for some time who kept saying to me, "You're not a Tory, you're UKIP, really." And I was starting to believe them. And I'd met a gentleman at an event who'd impressed me massively, a gentleman called Nigel Farage. And from there on in, a change happened.
Well, if there's anyone that can persuade somebody of a political character, it's got to be Nigel Farage. I remember in 2015, myself, I got a knock on the door from my local Tory candidate, a guy called Kit Malthouse, who's now a police minister, and he took over from Sir George Young, who is now Lord Young, who retired from the House of Parliament into the House of Lords. And I thought he was such an empty vessel. There was nothing about him at all. It was just the typical flown in, parachuted in to a soft Tory seat. And that sparked something in me. I'd never been political before that. And I can remember it was a Sunday morning. I closed the door on him. There was nothing he was saying that was convincing me to vote for him. I remember walking back into my living room. My son was very, very young at the time on the couch. I sat on the couch and Sky News were interviewing the very same man, Nigel Farage, and everything he said. I can't remember how long the interview was, but it was like he was in my mind. I joined UKIP that day, and it was January the 15th, 2015. And, obviously it was just after the Euros 2014, at which point you were lucky enough to become a member of the European Parliament. Tell us a bit about that, the build up to it, and how you felt when you'd won.
Well, there was quite a long build up to it, really, because there'd been a period of time where, from joining UKIP, Nigel had basically used me, and I say this in the nicest sense of the word, used me, to make sure that the West Midlands area of UKIP was in more functional order. Because I'd had training as a Conservative campaign executive, I knew a little bit about how to run a political campaign. So I'd spent a lot of time going around the West Midlands, pulling it together. There were also rebel factions there, people who were supporting
what year
the
did you join?
2011, early 2011.
Yeah.
And so from that point on, I was trying to pull the West Midlands together. There were rebel factions there supporting Mike Nattrass and Nicky Sinclair, who'd gone rogue. And there was a lot of infighting. So I had to go around and become extremely unpopular, sort of the jack-booted thug going around and pulling all the branches into order. Managed to recruit a lady back into the party to help me by the name of Jill Seymour. And we worked very closely together, pulling the West Midlands round. We also, I stood for the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner, and that was a dry run for us to get a European campaign together, because the boundaries for that were very similar to a European campaign. So Jill assisting me, we worked together as a team, went around the West Midlands and campaigned. Then we had the situation where we had to go through this selection process to get onto the list to be an MEP candidate, which consisted of an interview with the party chairman at the time and people off the NEC, which I found to be the most ridiculous and stupid interview I've ever been in my life. And I actually lost my temper during it and got marked down. When I was a naughty boy, got marked down. And then we had to get votes off the party membership in order to get to a certain position. I toured around the country, doing public meetings, speaking to the members. Anyway, managed to get myself elected third on the list, behind Jill, who was number one, and Jim Carver, who had appeared in the West Midlands list from somewhere. He's a good lad, Jim, but what he's got to do with the West Midlands, I'll never know, but fair do. Nice to have a little Cockney with us. Anyway, so I was third on the list, and we went out, and all three of us, and in fact, the other guys on the list as well, all the way down to 7, and I will give them all the credit in the world. They came out, they led teams all around the West Midlands, and we had loads of activists who came out with us, and every day that campaign, we were out hitting different areas, going in cavalcades. Jill had got a big Jeep or something like some Range Rover, was all carrying all sorts of banners around with it. And there's a few stories from that I'll tell after if you want, about us being run out of places and pelted and stuff like that. But we worked our balls off, and the membership were phenomenal. And there was a couple of times where lady activists, one of them actually fainted from exhaustion. She'd worked that hard. And at the end of that campaign, we came to the election, and the last result that came out was Stone in Staffordshire, and we needed to win that by some distance for me to be elected in third place due to the system that was being engaged. And the Labour Party thought they got it. I vividly remember Tom Watson and a bunch of his lefty cronies shouting abuse and being generally pompous about it all. And thank God for the people of Stone in Staffordshire, I shall always be grateful. They gave us a resounding win, and I squeezed in by the skin of my teeth, the very last MEP elected on the whole night. Went up and gave a very wild speech about the future being purple and we were going to wipe the board everywhere. Went back to my office where all the activists were there watching the results, with beer and curry that I'd laid on for them. Got very drunk with them, then got the train down to London the next day to have a photo shoot with Nigel, and I was the last person to walk into the room, very much the worse for wear.
Well, it's a phenomenal landmark for UKIP. I mean, UKIP are already doing well. I think so when you joined in 2011, I looked at the historic polling. UKIP were at 17%. By the time the European Union elections took place in 2014, UKIP were at 38% at one point in the week building up before. So the first party to basically wipe the floor with both the Conservatives and Labour, and that's a phenomenal, a phenomenal feat. So you obviously stood down as an MEP once the Brexit Party pretty much stole UKIP's thunder and cloves, if you like, in 2019. So how did that feel? Because I understand that you quit UKIP and then you joined the Libertarian Party and then the Brexit Party.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I didn't stand down as an MEP. I was, what's the word, gazumped, and more favourable faces put in my place without any due process at all. I left UKIP during the height of the Gerard Batten regime, and amongst the reasons for that were that Gerard had given me certain assurances about the direction the party was going to go in, which had led to me and others not opposing him and actually lending us our support, even though we really, really, really didn't like the idea of him being leader. And he probably would have won even without our support. But he'd given me certain assurances and he broke them all. And frankly, the direction the party was going in, I know it was very popular with a lot of people, and respect to that, but it certainly wasn't the party that I joined. So I left, and I thought, well, there's a Libertarian Party out there. I'm more libertarian in nature. I'll give them my support. I'll sort of raise the flag for libertarianism, try and get people to know a bit about it. But that party leadership was more of a debating club than a political party. Yeah. And I spoke with Nigel, and I had the inkling very early on that there was something happening with the new party. And I told him, as I'd told him all the way through since meeting him, where you lead, I will follow. Or wherever you wish us to go, I'll go there first and walk on the mines, and you can walk over it afterwards. And I think I was probably one of the first at least, to declare as a Brexit Party MEP. And I gave them my full support until such a time that it was due for the new candidates to be in place. And without even being notified or spoken to at all, a list came out without my name on it, with a load of people on it who I'd never seen ever do anything for the party or for politics at all, ever. And
well, I think that's maybe a story for another day, but I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you there. I mean, I was in UKIP from 2015 right up until 2018. And very, very few of them I'd ever seen. And I've been to every campaign up and down the country, and I don't remember seeing half of them. I mean, I do think they did. I do think they did a good job. I do think they did a good job, but it seemed very odd that you guys that had shown loyalty to Nigel, none of you were on the ticket. But anyway, like I say, we're not here to talk about them. The Brexit Party no longer exists, so they'll go down as the party that basically forced the Conservative Party to actually deliver the Brexit that UKIP had fought for, won the referendum, and so, like I say, that's all confined to history.
I think it's fair to say that at that election, if you'd have put Nigel as leader of a party and put a load of pigs in lipstick with rosettes saying, I'm in Nigel Farage's party, they would have won an election. They didn't do any campaigning, as far as I'm aware, not like what the kind of work we had to do.
I think everyone knows that, but anyway, that's it. It is what it is. I just want to say on behalf of Gerard Batten, he did an amazing job when he came in, as leader of UKIP. I mean, he had a tough job. The party was bankrupt. He was looking at court cases, and one of the strengths of UKIP has always been its grassroots. It always has been. The only card he had to play was to turn to the membership, and he did a phenomenal job. I think he raised £300,000, which obviously solved UKIP's initial winding up order and stuff like that. So he did a phenomenal job. But I do agree with you that towards the end of his tenure, he trusted people that he shouldn't have trusted, and he did make some decisions that I think if he was honest enough now to look back on it, he'd agree that he did make a lot of mistakes. But he's not here to defend himself, so I don't want to disrespect Gerard. I've got so much respect for him. UKIP was a tough party under Nigel. It was a tough party. A lot of infighting. A lot of MEPs turned on each other. It was almost as if you could imagine a narcissistic family. Do you know what I mean? Where you have your patriarchy that sets everyone else onto each other, and But again, that's history now. Everyone's moved on. But what about you now? So you're back with UKIP. Neil Hamilton's the leader of the party. You're their current economics spokespersons. What do you think? Assuming you're allowed to sort of say this, but what do you think of UKIP's future? What do you think? You've got the Reform Party, which I think is the dead in the water now. Nigel has stepped aside. You've got Lawrence Fox's Reclaim Party, though I've asked Lawrence today exactly what it is he's doing. I met him 3 months ago, and I'm yet to see a party start to develop. I really hope he does it, but at the moment there's a big question mark. So in reality, UKIP is the only party that has branches across the country, admittedly not as many as it did in its heyday. It has paid up members who contribute, who have a say in the party's leadership, vote on the NEC. But where do you think UKIP's future lie in the future?
Well, to start off with, I think that Neil Hamilton being the leader at this time is the best thing that UKIP could have, because he's got the experience. He's this man is a Champions League player, and he knows what he's doing. I also tend to agree with him on politics. I always felt that UKIP was the original views of UKIP that I signed up to in 2011 was entirely my political home, and is the only party I've ever 100% or 99% agreed with almost everything they say. And I don't say that because I had anything to do with the policies, because I didn't. I just felt that they were me. I'm probably more of a libertarian slant than many of the membership, but I think that where the party is now is there is room for growth and expansion. I think that the party could come back, but we have a problem. And when I say we, I mean those of us on the patriotic, libertarian right, all of those who Nigel managed with the force of his personality to unite under in one big tent. And never let it be said that anyone else could have done that except Nigel, because every other leader that UKIP's had, every other UKIP politician or every other politician of this type can't bring everyone together. Well, I mean, I have massive respect for Patrick O'Flynn, but me and him have a laugh about this many times. How me and Patrick ended up in the same party is beyond anyone's belief. You're a social democrat and a Thatcherite libertarian. How did that happen? And what happens when Nigel withdrew? All of the difference came out. All of the problems. We're never going to stay in one party. It was impossible. The problem we have is that I have massive respect for Neil. I think he's a top bloke, a great politician. I have a lot of respect for Lawrence Fox. I met him and did an interview with him, virtually met him. I think he's a good bloke, and I love his libertarianism. There's people like David Curtin, who I think he's a good guy and he's got some good views, perhaps a little bit more on the Christian authoritarian side than me, but I totally respect him. And there's many more out there, and there's the problem. There's many.
We're splintered.
We're so splintered, and there isn't one leader who has the clout of Nigel to pull it all together. And there are too many characters out there. I would hesitate to say ego, although I think in the case of certainly the people in charge of the Reform Media organisation, there is an ego issue. But I think with the other guys, it's not that. I think that they truly, genuinely, sincerely believe that they should be leading our faction. And so many people believe that bringing it together is very, very difficult. I would love it to be under UKIP, because UKIP is the proven vehicle of change. And believe it or not, there's a lot of people out there still who have a strong affection towards UKIP. But it needs to be done, because at the moment, let's be honest, our side of the argument is being trounced out the park because we're not getting the airtime, we're not being organised enough, and there's too many of us, and we tend to fight each other. It just doesn't work.
It's definitely. I've talked with a lot of the, a lot of the leaders. I would say I've only really got to know Neil Hamilton in the last few months. I don't speak to him that often, but when I do, I find him very charismatic. I think he's very clever, very shrewd. You can tell he's a seasoned politician. Very, very clever, very, very, very focused. Unfortunately, UKIP didn't do very well in the previous elections, and I think he's lost his seat in the Welsh Assembly. But that's more there. Wales is lost than anything else. But you are right. Which I don't know what Richard Tice is doing. I don't understand what he's. I listen to him and I listen to his message. I read his tweets, and again, there's not a lot I disagree with that he says. But one thing I noticed in the marches that we've had this year, Lawrence has been front and centre. Yeah, front and centre. Richard has been at home tweeting. Yeah, I noticed that I've said this to him and he's blocked me, but who cares? I've said this to him. He's one of those people that will cheer everyone else on to do the work. But if there's a gig on in the London Palladium, he wants to be on the stage without earning the right to be there. The difference between Nigel Farage and him is Nigel's walked pretty much every square inch of this country over in his 20 odd years. This is a man that will go on any council estate in the country and knock on every door with a smile on his face. Could you see Richard Tice doing that? No. Could you see Richard Tice even holding a leaflet? Do you see what I mean?
Holding one for a photo opportunity. Well, I couldn't see him actually posting it through the door. He's probably got a servant to do that.
He's obviously a clever guy, but it's just that sincerity, and he just lacks that sincerity. He oozes entitlement, and that's not going to turn on the electorate.
He uses something anyway. But let me tell you about a quick thing about Nigel that sums up the difference. I went with him campaigning on many occasions, but there was one in particular. I can't remember what it was. Might have been Eastleigh. But we'd been out from the early hours in the morning, leafleting. As you say, Nigel was there with us side by side, leafleting, knocking doors, hour upon hour upon hour. We'd all been rammed into the back of a small car. Kirsten had been driving this small car with all the banners and everything. We were like this crushed. We went and did all this massive campaigning. We worked through until about 5 or 6 at night. Then Nigel did a load of media and we were helping and assisting with that. Then we went into the bar in the pub and we were there for many hours, Nigel drinking a reasonable amount of Guinness, as those who will have drunk with him know. And every time that there was a clip of him on the news, we all had to do a quick knock it back in one session, and he was on all rolling news. So it was great stuff. Got to about 12 o'clock. I was absolutely pie-eyed. I thought to myself, I better get to bed because I know what Nigel's like. First thing in the morning, Etheridge, where are you? And it'll be about 7 o'clock and I'll be there still pie-eyed. Went to bed, left him in the bar. Next morning, set my alarm for 6:30. Right, bleary-eyed, struggling. Turned on the telly, breakfast news. There was Nigel Farage on the sofa, looking as bright as a button, like nothing had happened, and absolutely slaughtering it on the news. And I was just struggling to get out of bed still at that point. And then, as soon as he finished in the studio, where was he? Back out campaigning with us. That's the kind of thing that people like Tice and other wannabes need to understand. You don't just go out on the stage, you don't just claim victory, you work your balls off for year after year after year to get the right. And that's why these people have no credibility whatsoever. They buy their way into a position, they try to buy the revolution. Well, the revolution was nothing to do with them. And what they're doing now is trying to steal the emperor's clothes, and it doesn't wash.
Yep. Well, look at their election results. I mean, obviously UKIP struggled, but so did the Reform Party. I actually think in a couple of constituencies, UKIP beat the Reform Party.
So did in Wales in particular?
Yeah.
If it wasn't in Wales, if it wasn't for the Abolish the Assembly Party, which had ex-UKIP members in, and Reform, which had ex-UKIP members, they both got less than UKIP. You put it all together, and they'd have kept the UKIP seats.
Yeah, well, again, splintered. That's the problem, and the far left lunatics benefit from it.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about the governing party of the day, Boris Johnson and his Conservative Party. I've been quite vocal in my just utter bewilderment that these guys can be taken seriously because they're not conservatives. Boris is chasing a green agenda now. The last time I looked at the Conservative manifesto from 2019, it said nothing about committing industrial suicide by following all these crazy green ideas. So what's your thoughts on Boris and his Conservative Party today?
Well, I've met Boris Johnson, and I can tell you, I thought all along, and I said it at our MEP meetings when we were discussing we had to go with vote leave and leave EU, and Boris is this. Boris Johnson is whatever people want him to be that day. He has no principles, no beliefs, and no ideals. I was with him when I was a lackey working for the Tory party. One of those, he was walking by, snapping the orders to us and instructions. We were all following behind with clipboards and all the rest of it. The BBC came over and said, "Oh, Boris, could we have an interview?" And from being, yes, sharp as a tack, he went, "Hang on a minute." Got his hair like that, moved his tie to one side. "Okay, guys, I'm ready now." It's all a put on load of balls. He's not like that at all. And this is a man who, before deciding what side to join on the referendum campaign, had to write himself an essay for one side and an essay for other. If you are a patriotic person who gives a damn about your country, you don't have to write an essay to discuss whether or not you're going to surrender to a foreign power. The man is a charlatan. And what he's brought in is not conservative, as we know, but it is a very unholy and vile mixture of populism in terms of true populism, of giving people something for nothing. We'll pay you your money for sitting at home on your arse. We'll do all these things. We'll make sure everyone's got jolly lots of money and everything's going to be all right. Mixed in with control from the state, mixed in with green measures, which can only be brought in through some form of communism. And the man is an absolute wretched wannabe dictator, and his party should not be supporting him if they have one iota of conservatism about them.
When you said about him ruffling his hair, I've met Boris Johnson twice, and the second time I met him was at I want to say what's the cricket ground in Southampton called?
Oh gosh, I should know that. I'm a big cricket fan. I can't remember. Rose Bowl, is it?
The Rose Bowl. Really, really, really nice. Well, I went to a vote leave event, and this would have been either March or April 2016, because obviously Southampton's close to where I live. Anyway, so I rocked up, and Michael Gove was there as well, and really, really nice guys. I have to say they were polite, and everything else. Got a few pictures and stuff with them. But the funny thing was I handed my phone to a lady who walked in the door with Michael Gove. So I've got a photo of them stood on either side of me. But the funny thing was, as she went to take the photo with my phone, Boris messed his hair up. And I remember looking at him thinking, because I first thought, has he got something in his hair? But I have to say, he was really friendly, very polite. I liked him straight away because he's good. He can play a crowd. He knows how to play a crowd. But my opinion of him today, his politics are that of a flag blowing in the wind. That's how it is to me. But anyway, that's my opinion. So the future of UKIP. Where do you see UKIP then? What do you think? What does Neil think? How can UKIP survive? The reason I ask this is I'm politically homeless. Yeah, I've got my eye on Lawrence Fox's party, but I'm a little bit confused as to what they're doing, and So why should I rejoin UKIP? Why should the thousands of people that are watching this rejoin UKIP?
Well, obviously, I can't speak for what Neil thinks, but I know Neil well enough to know that policy-wise, he puts forward and sanctions very, very sensible, common sense, right of centre policies, unashamedly strong on immigration, unashamedly extremely strong on illegal immigration, smaller state, less taxation, and many of the things actually that UKIP used to stand for when we were popular. He's also an extremely good communicator and a good front man. I think where the party needs to go and could go is to unite the factions, and this is what needs to happen. And this is the hard part, because the support is there. There is a glass ceiling, I think, of support for a party like UKIP of somewhere around 23-24% in a domestic election. Not in, European election, different thing, because there's one
enough
United
to be a kingmaker. Enough to be a kingmaker.
And there's also a point where in a domestic first past the post election, I can't remember what it is, but if you're up to about 19% with an evenly spread vote, you only get 2 or 3 seats. But if you get over 22-23%, suddenly they're falling in their tens. Yeah. So actually in 2015, although we didn't win any seats, at one point in that campaign, we were seriously close to winning dozens of seats. And I think we could do it again, but we'd have to stop all of the factions, and we'd have to make sure we gave a united front, and we'd have to have free and fair elections for leadership figures so that there was no quibbling and no problem about who was in charge. And those who were in charge would have to stick to the policy manifesto as agreed by the membership.
So what would you say then? How would you get all of these factions together? Because I've talked to them all. And you hit the nail on the head of 20 minutes ago when you mentioned egos. So how would you, even though they all know that they're never going to do anything individually, how would you bring them all together?
I would like to see the leaders of the factions gathering together and meeting in good faith. Probably it would need to be brokered by someone who all of them have some respect for, and no one's got any long-standing grudges against, so it wouldn't be me. But I think they certainly need to gather together, sit around the table and put things to one side. Now I think that many of these people are people of good faith, and aside from the playboy pretend politician that we've spoken about before, the rest of them actually do this because they believe in it. And I think that they should and could come together and form a united front. It would be a dream come true. Lawrence Fox cares strongly about fighting the woke culture wars. Of course, that's a UKIP thing. In fact, didn't he say he wanted a UKIP for culture? Well, actually, there is a UKIP for culture, and it's called UKIP. So why not bring that in? We've got David Curtin, who was an absolute strong UKIP man for many years. Bring that in. There are all these different groups. We're all UKIP, really. We are, and we're all just split into separate groups because there's a bit of UKIP's nasty, or we've had this, or some of us MEPs and some of us prominent figures got crap thrown at us through the media, so we don't really want to be associated with that. There is always a hope of a comeback, and you stick with an established brand, and the brand is worth a fortune even to this day. Everyone knows who UKIP is. People don't know who Reform, Reclaim, No one knows who these people are. Come together, put the egos to one side, and work for the national good.
Sorry, getting
I think I've caught your cough down the line.
I know. I know that Lawrence and Neil Hamilton have talked. I don't know what the outcome of that conversation was, but I cannot see so I'll give you an example. I'm a massive fan of Anne-Marie Waters. Yeah, I won't be very popular for saying this, but it needs to be said. The problem I have with Anne-Marie is that this is my opinion. She's not a team player. Yeah, I think her stance on a particular religion and stuff is accurate if you look at the amount of terrorist attacks and female genital mutilation. If all of the things, mass industrialized child rape across the country, which unfortunately the Telegraph reported is still going on. I don't know what Priti Patel and the Home Office are doing about that, but that's another story. Everything she says is spot on. She's one of the most powerful speakers I've ever listened to, very closely behind Nigel Farage. She knows what she's talking about. But the problem is, for me, is she's very strong on that, but weak on other problems. You know, housing, the economy, green energy stuff that's forced down our throats. She's known as a one-trick pony. Which I think is a shame, but I know she would never work with anyone else. Not in a million years. Not in a million years. So you've got David Curtin, who I really like. Such a clever bloke, very charismatic. He's the leader of his Heritage Party, but it's just him. It's just him. He's never going to. Yeah, he'll get headlines in his local press, but he's never going to make a noise. Nothing like he did when he was part of a big established party, which, let's face it, that's what UKIP is, an established party. It may have lost a lot of its elected representation, but as you said, every household in this country, whether they like them or not, they know who UKIP is. So I'm very worried for the future of our country, because the Tories are left-wing, Labour are far left-wing, Liberal Democrats only care about people that have got 100 grand cash or more in their banks. The working class man and woman in this country has zero representation. Richard Tice isn't going to do it. I'm not convinced at the moment Lawrence is going to do it. Hopefully he'll prove me wrong.
Lawrence could.
3 months in.
Lawrence could, if he was with the right people around in the right structure. Yes. Lawrence has got a lot of talent.
He's a very, very clever guy, but from the team that's around him now, and I'm saying this because it's the truth as I see it. Yeah, no one around him will attract the working class vote. Nobody that I see.
Well, it's risky to be too London centric if you're this kind of politician, because whilst absolutely London is crucial, however, your support isn't really in London. I know there's a lot of support in London, but if you want to win an election, you come to the West Midlands, you come to the Northwest, you come to places, our version of the Rust Belt. You look at what Trump did. He went to those places. He gave people who had no hope. And this is what needs to be done. And you simply can't do it by sitting in London, making really good points, really strong points. But it doesn't matter. You need to be in a working man's club, making those points, or sitting having a couple of pints in a local, making those points. You don't need to be sat in London doing snazzy videos, because you'll get to people like you and me will watch them. But if you want to get to the voting man and woman who really is a bit cheesed off and probably won't bother to vote for anyone because they're like you, politically disenfranchised, you get on the streets and you reach them there. You get a loudspeaker and you stand in the town centre and cause a nuisance. That's what you do. You're on top of a bus. Those are the things that people will notice. And that's what whoever is going to do this needs to do. And you just, if I may, just come back to Anne-Marie Waters. She is a very good speaker. I've encountered it on several times. And whilst I'm sure she doesn't like me very much, I do think she's a talented and intelligent lady. The issue I would have, a little bit like what you've said there, it is just the one thing emphasised so much. And you do have to understand, I think, in her shoes, that at one point there were quite a few people of the Muslim faith who voted for UKIP because they believe in family values, small businesses, and hard work. Now, every faith has got some bad apples, and there are some issues with people of the Islamic faith. We know that, maybe cultural as well. But there's a hell of a lot of English, British Muslims who really are on our wavelength. On the night of the referendum, I was being messaged by local mosques in the West Midlands, and their message was, "Tonight we shall be free, inshallah." Now, Anne-Marie and others, with her focus on the one thing, would lose that kind of support. You need to say, we treat people on their merits. The bad eggs, my God, we treat you with the contempt and the punishment you deserve. But people who want to live by British standards and British laws and be decent people, we support you and we're on your side.
I totally understand what you're saying, but the one thing I'm going to contradict myself a little bit now. It's the child rape gangs, because no one gives a shit. The Tories don't care a shite. They've been in power now 11 years. They don't give a shit. Labour salivate over it. I mean, they've got a peer in the House of Lords that a few years ago attempted to put a bill through Parliament that would reduce the age of consensual sex to 10. So that tells you everything about the direction that party was going in, because the Labour Party NEC must have approved it for it to get that far. They must have done. And that, for me, is paedophilia. It's paedophilia.
Well, yeah.
10 years old. 10 years old.
Clear cut. Yeah.
But so I Anne-Marie is right, because no one else is talking about it. No one else. Right across the country, we've got vulnerable children, that have already got a life where they're away for whatever reason, that they're not with their parents. So it's a daunting, lonely start to their lives, and yet they're molested. I mean, it's just disgusting. So no one else is talking about it. So on that side, I'm totally with her. But anyway, look, moving on as we're going to wind up soon now. You and I have really got to known each other since October of last year.
Yeah.
And I think before that we had a bit of an abusive Twitter relationship and Facebook relationship where, how it is. You just have a pop at each other. But it does show that I mean, my opinion of you is vastly different to how my perception of you was. Now I've got to know you. Yeah. And maybe, if there was some kind of meeting of the centre right, that we could all get together and maybe heal the wounds. I don't know. I don't see how we go forward. There is no electoral option in this country. For me right now, if there was an election tomorrow, I think it would probably be the first time I've not voted in my life. And that depresses me, because I believe in what our forefathers fought to give us the freedoms and the option to pick who we send to Parliament. How do you feel about that?
I think that we actually have a golden opportunity, because there are some of us battle-scarred old war horses still knocking around, but there is also a new breed of freedom-supporting people like Lawrence Fox and one or two other people who are popping up around the place. I mean, I'm going to give a mention. He's not a politician, but he does some great stuff on his Twitter. To Zuby, I mean, this guy, I hate rap music, but this guy's Twitter feed is like something from a libertarian handbook. Anyway, brilliant. But, there's a new breed of people who are involved. And if we could combine the experience and know-how that those of us who've been fighting these battles for a decade or more have got, with the freshness and perhaps more rounded communication skills of some of the new guys, wow, we'd have a force to be reckoned with. And I think the coming together that you speak about, I mean, I fought battles for 10 years, and most of them actually were against my own side most of the time. But, after a while, if you're a normal, rounded human being, you mature and you get tired of fighting, and you just want to have a reasonable conversation. And that's where I'm at. And I'm sure that's where a lot of the people who've been going through this for years are. I don't really want to fight anyone anymore. I'm getting grey, I'm getting bald, I'm getting old, I'm getting tired. I want to help to win our freedom back. And I think we can do it if people just put aside the preconceptions of who someone is and actually get to meet them, shake their hand, and actually understand and learn what we all are really about. Because all of us, I'm convinced, as I've said many times during this conversation, all of us have at heart the right things, the desire for freedom and patriotism and all the good stuff. It's just we've come at it from different angles, and we've bumped anklers to a few times, and we've ended up with the wrong idea of each other. We could pull together if we just use a bit of maturity and a bit of common sense, and stop worrying about who's in charge and start worrying about the freedom of our country and the freedom of its citizens to have a better life.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right, Bill. I do worry about where we're going, because we've all got very similar messages. David pretty much says the same as Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie says pretty much the same as Lawrence Fox. Lawrence Fox says pretty much the same, but he articulates himself better.
Oh, yes.
Than Nigel Farage. Nigel goes straight for the throat. But yeah, well, look, it's interesting times. What do you think? What do you think the future is? So if there was a general election next year, which I'm hearing now on Sky News and stuff that there very well could be.
Oh, no, another.
How do you think the Tories would do?
Oh, they'd win. They'd win by a distance because they would. If they're planning a general election next year, then they're going to magic up a load more pretend fake money to make sure everyone's kept nicely fed and happy and comfortable in this totally false economic scenario that they've created. And I refer any viewers to Godfrey Bloom's work on that. The pigeons will come home to roost, but not just yet. They'll go around telling everyone that they've jabbed freedom into all of our arms, not into this arm, but into all of their people's arms. And they'll win because they've terrified people for 18 months or more now. And they're seen as, oh, thank you, Daddy State, for looking after us. And they'll win by a distance also because the Labour Party offer nothing different. They're saying the same thing, just saying it worse. And the Liberals, well, they're a niche party. And the Greens, well, Boris is stealing their clothes. And the real freedom parties are too busy ripping each other's throats out to actually think about fighting. So, yeah, the Tories would win, and it'd be a disaster because the worst thing for this country right now is another 5 years of these Tories because they are morphing more and more into something. I genuinely think their policies are evil in many respects, and I think that they are going to cause untold damage to the working class, to the everyday people of this country, who will have all social mobility taken from them. The cost of living is going to go through the roof, and their freedom to choose what they want to do and how they want to do it could be gone forever with another 5 years of this mob.
I know, right. Hypothetical situation. It's January 2020 and you're Prime Minister, right? So I want you to give me what you would have done as Prime Minister between, obviously, hindsight. Boris didn't have the benefit of hindsight, but what would you have done between January and April of last year when the breakout of the pandemic started to rear its head?
Well, using the hindsight that we've got now, I would first and foremost have realised that the majority of deaths and from people who are contracting the virus are in hospitals and care homes. And I would have made sure that hospitals didn't discharge thousands of people carrying the virus into care homes in a mad panicked rush through looking at the forecasts of lunatics like Neil Ferguson. I would have made sure that there was proper infection control measures actually well before this in our hospitals, because let's face it, this virus is not the only thing that spreads in our hospitals, killing the vulnerable and weak. It's a consistent feature. Hospitals are a very dangerous place to be. If you're unwell, a very dangerous place. So I think that should have been in place. I would then have looked at ways where the elderly and the infirm could have been given some kind of a furlough version, so if they needed to shield until we got a grip on things. And you know what? I'd have told everyone else, get out there, carry on as normal, work, socialise, because frankly, if you catch it, it's very unlikely to kill you if you're not in those groups. And what is better, if you catch it, you might well get the antibodies and we'll get towards herd immunity earlier. So I wouldn't go for all out, let it rip, as they call it, but I would have had very selective shielding and very selective spending, and the economy would be in a far better place, and we wouldn't have had all these draconian laws, because I fundamentally disagree with the whole nature of it. I would seriously have to consider it if it was Ebola, but certainly not for the nature of this pandemic. No, not at all. Never. No way would I ever do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, the last question, and this is something, obviously I follow you on Twitter, and you do a lot of, a lot of walk and talk videos, which are really good. But one thing that's absolutely baffled me, right? So right all the way through the last year, I don't understand how you can be one of Matt Hancock's biggest fans.
Am I? Yeah, I detest Matt Hancock. I had a prediction some time ago, and I'm going to stand by it. I believe that Mr. Hancock will eventually one day end up in jail, and when he does, I will do a jig of delight, and I will be the happiest man out because. And I won't go into all the reasons why I think, because I don't want to get sued. But I believe that man has been absolutely disastrous and not at all acting according to the standards we would expect. And I want to see him punished legally for what he's done.
Well, one of the problems that I've had throughout the last year is the goalpost moving. That's the problem. On a Tuesday they say this, and on a Thursday they say that. So on April the 18th of last year, during a Sky News interview, the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, was asked about masks, and he said, well, they don't do a great deal at all, really, quote unquote. He said, if you have COVID, it's a good idea to wear them. But if you don't have COVID, they have next to no benefit whatsoever. Then within 6 months, maybe a little bit longer, it becomes law. You have to wear face masks. So I straight away, being the type of individual that I am, I'm like, well, what? Well, which is it? You're telling us 1 minute they do nothing, because I was wearing it all the time. I wore it all the time until I didn't like wearing it. I wore it all the time until I saw that, and I thought, oh, thank God for that. And I took it off because I was worried. 500,000 dead, and we were hearing figures of up to anywhere between 500 and 800 people a day were dying of COVID-19. Now we know that's not true. There were still unfortunately large amounts of people dying of COVID-19, but not like it was being reported. But anyway, that's another story, and an inquiry will give us the real facts on that. We were told if you have the vaccine, you're free. You get your life back. 3 weeks to flatten the curve. All the time they say things. I do understand that the more we learn, the more that things change and we adapt the way that we do things. I do understand that, but it's the whole making promises and then going completely against it. But today, this week, last month, I've been completely vindicated with my skepticism over Boris and his cronies. Look at the G7 meeting. They all space themselves out when on camera. And yet when they all go for lunch, they're all got arms around each other, loving it up, spending taxpayers' money. Don't they know? Doesn't somebody know in there? Look, hang on a second. The general public now can see all this. This is the problem. We all know COVID-19 is real. We know it's real. The level of whether it's a pandemic or an epidemic, I think history will have a particular opinion on that once all the facts do come out over the next year to 10 years. But the problem is that you can tell that the rules that they give us, they don't believe in themselves. So it's very, very difficult for those of us that pay attention to take them seriously. That's the problem I've got. And I think Matt Hancock I don't know about going to prison or anything like that, but I think he should go to prison for taking the British public as a mug, because he'd say one thing on camera and do another thing off, which we now know, and that for me is unforgivable.
He's not the only one, though, is he? Piers Morgan has been a great cheerleader for how awful this all is, and we've all got to do as we're told.
But Piers Morgan, as much as I agree with you, doesn't set legislation. He doesn't tell my kids that they have to potentially end up wearing face masks or be jabbed to have a jab that doesn't kill children. For a disease that doesn't kill fit and healthy children.
It massively influences public opinion, which then influences political decisions.
Well, not anymore. He doesn't.
Well, he did. He did.
Look, Bill, let's turn it in now. We're at 59 minutes. So thank you so much for your time. I really, really do appreciate it. Coming up next, we're going to speak to Paul Nuttall, Tim Aker, and Stephen Wolfe. So if you like what we're doing, please do tune in and follow us on YouTube and hit the subscribe button. Bill, thank you very much and have a good evening.
Cheers.
Bye all.